All right, so ready to dive deep.
I am. Always ready for a good deep dive.
Perfect. So today we're looking at bell hooks,
Oh, yeah.
and specifically we're taking excerpts from her book, Teaching to Transgress: Education as the Practice of Freedom.
I'm excited for this one. This book is just like jam-packed with incredible insights about teaching and learning
Yeah.
and how we can like make these spaces more inclusive and exciting,
Absolutely. For those of you listening who are interested in education and want to kind of get to the core ideas quickly,
Right.
this is a great deep dive to listen to because we're really going to boil down Hook's most important points.
Yeah.
For example, her notion of engaged pedagogy, which we'll talk about, and her vision for a truly like inclusive and kind of vibrant learning experience.
Yeah, and I think that's really what makes Hook so compelling. She's not just talking about theory, but her ideas come from like her own life, her
Yeah.
experience as a student and a teacher,
Right.
where she saw how traditional education like often missed the mark.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how she didn't just like settle for that. She actively sought out, better ways to teach and to learn.
Yeah, and she was really inspired by some like phenomenal people.
Right.
She talks about Black women teachers that she had in her own life
Yeah.
that really inspired her.
That's amazing.
The work of Paulo Freire, obviously, we'll talk about him more.
Such an influence.
Yeah, and feminist thinking in general
Yeah.
were all these major influences on how she approached education.
And from these, these powerful sources,
Mm-hmm.
she arrived at this like core belief that guided her early teaching, which was that the classroom should be exciting.
Right.
Never boring.
It seems so obvious, right?
You wouldn't think so.
Like, of course.
Right.
But Hooks points out that even amongst like radical educators at the time, there wasn't a lot of discussion about the importance of excitement in the learning process.
It's true. And I think that kind of speaks to how, higher education was often perceived. There was this idea that learning had to be super serious, almost like austere.
Right.
Like excitement would somehow, undermine that.
Right, like it can't be rigorous if it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. But Hooks disagreed. She believed that genuine intellectual engagement and excitement, they're not mutually exclusive. They can
Okay.
actually feed off each other.
Right, they work together.
Yeah.
Okay, so that leads us to kind of the core of what we're talking about today, which is engaged pedagogy.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does that look like in practice?
Engaged pedagogy is really about creating a learning environment where everyone who's there,
Mm-hmm.
students, teachers, facilitators, whoever, feels that their presence and their contributions are genuinely valued.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on genuine valuing. It takes a real like shift in mindset for the teachers.
It does, and it also involves kind of tearing down this traditional idea of the teacher as like
Right.
the expert, the holder of our knowledge.
Yeah, the sage on the stage.
Right. Hooks argues instead that the teacher should be more focused on shaping the dynamics of the learning environment
Yeah.
and to encourage a space where excitement can, kind of bubble up organically through like shared effort of everybody there.
Absolutely.
She viewed the learning space as like a community, a true community. And she believed that when that sense of community was strong,
Right.
the more likely it was that everybody would participate and actually enrich the experience for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense.
But it's not always easy. There's a lot of challenges to creating this kind of communal learning space.
Oh, yeah. What are some of the things that she points out?
Well, one challenge is that some students, some learners come into the classroom with very traditional expectations.
Mhm.
They're used to being told what to do, told what to learn, and they're just, passive.
Passive recipients of information.
Right. Another challenge is the teacher's own comfort level.
Hmm.
It can be scary to shift from being the holder of all knowledge to like a facilitator of shared learning.
Right.
Right. And then we can't forget about logistical things, scheduling issues, class sizes, the practical elements that make it difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. All very real-world constraints.
But even beyond that, Hooks also saw that students were often left feeling like something was missing,
Really
even in, traditional educational models.
interesting. What was it? What was the missing piece?
A lot of times it was this feeling that, like, the knowledge they were gaining wasn't connected to their lives.
I see.
It was just this kind of abstract thing that they were supposed to learn and then, regurgitate on a test or whatever.
Right.
But it didn't really connect with their lived experiences.
It's so interesting how she identifies that because it really does point to this hunger that people have
Yeah.
for knowledge that feels relevant,
Yeah.
knowledge that bridges that gap between what we learn and how we actually live.
Yeah, and this is where the idea of resistance in education comes into play.
Resist.
Yeah, she draws on the work of Chandra Mohanty, who sees resistance as a form of self-conscious engagement
Oh.
with dominant ideas
Yeah.
to like reclaim subjugated knowledge.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about passively taking in information,
Right.
but actually like questioning and challenging the power structures that shape what we learn and how we learn it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Hooks kind of concludes that portion by saying that the teachers who are most successful at creating engaged learning spaces are the ones who are, open to personal growth themselves.
That makes sense.
The ones who are really invested in self-actualization.
We have teachers who are learners themselves.
Right, because they're better able to create these like pedagogical practices that engage students.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Hooks also talks about her experience going to her like integrated high school reunion,
Oh, wow.
which for her wasn't just this like nostalgic trip. It brought up a lot of really complex feelings and insights about racial desegregation.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, what was it about that experience that really stood out to you?
Well, one thing that was just like so powerful was the raw emotion, like the
Yeah.
anger and the sense of loss that a lot of Black students felt when they were moved into these like predominantly white schools.
Yeah, it's such a reminder that integration wasn't, this simple happy ending that some might assume.
Right. And she talks about how, even in these supposedly integrated settings, like deeply ingrained racial biases
Yeah.
and the reality of white dominance, like it persisted. It didn't just disappear overnight.
Of course not.
But at the same time, she also tells this really inspiring story about how a small group of students
Mm-hmm.
from different backgrounds tried to create a different kind of culture.
Yeah.
One that was based on true racial equality.
I love that. That, really speaks to the power of individuals to create change, even within, systems that are working against them.
Yeah. And this experience really shaped Hook's thinking about what true change required.
So.
She realized that just ending segregation wasn't enough.
Right.
Like there needed to be this much deeper challenge to like the systems of domination themselves,
I see.
which led her to this idea of a true revolution of values.
Okay, a revolution of values.
Yeah.
What does that entail?
Well, she says that it requires this fundamental shift from, a society that's focused on material things, like a thing-oriented society,
Mm-hmm.
to one that genuinely values people.
Interesting. And this, this idea connects directly to her critique of superficial approaches to multiculturalism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, she was really wary of efforts that like celebrated diversity on the surface, but didn't really address those underlying inequalities and power imbalances.
You think that actually matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And she saw firsthand how difficult it was for educators who genuinely tried to bring like multiculturalism and different perspectives into their learning spaces.
What were some of the challenges they faced?
Well, one challenge was resistance from, not only students, but also colleagues, people who were maybe invested in maintaining that status quo.
Yeah, I can see that.
And a key insight here is her point about whiteness often operating as like this kind of invisible, unacknowledged norm.
The default setting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, this created a lot of discomfort and challenges for both learners and educators who weren't part of that assumed norm.
Right, they felt like outsiders.
Yeah, they were othered in those spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Hooks emphasizes how important it is for educators to really understand and be able to like speak different cultural codes if they want to actually connect with a diverse group of learners.
It's like learning a new language, in a way.
Right.
The language of different cultures.
It also means acknowledging the very real pain that learners may be carrying because of, issues of race or ethnicity.
Yeah.
And not just treating these topics as like abstract, intellectual exercises.
Right. And it requires moving beyond just like token representation too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We've got to move beyond that tokenism.
Not just having a few diverse faces in the room, but actually like valuing their perspectives.
Right, and not expecting people from marginalized groups to, like, speak for their entire communities.
Exactly, yeah. To be the spokesperson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ultimately, Hooks argues that a real commitment to multiculturalism requires educators to recognize that knowledge isn't owned by any one group.
Right.
And to confront their own biases and blind spots.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Okay, so As we mentioned earlier, Paulo Freire was a huge influence on Hooks,
Yeah.
and she dedicates a significant chunk of her book to discussing his work.
So what were some of the key takeaways from Frere that resonated with her?
Well, one major concept was conscientization.
Conscientization. Can you
Hmm.
explain that for our listeners who may not be familiar?
It's like becoming critically aware of like social and political realities
Mhm.
and understanding how power operates in the world and how it shapes your own life.
So it's not just about learning facts, but about developing a kind of critical lens
Right.
through which you can, see the world and understand your place in it.
Yeah. And Hooks emphasizes how important it is to understand your own identity in relation to those broader power structures.
Absolutely.
And she also clarifies that conscientization isn't just about trying to change other people's minds.
Right, which is a common misconception, I think.
Yeah, it's more about personal growth and self-reflection.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because while Hooks clearly admires Frere, she also offers a critique of some of his earlier work,
Yeah.
specifically what she calls a phallocentric paradigm of liberation.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically, she noticed that some of his earlier writings seemed to lack a specific analysis of sexism,
I see.
how sexism operates in the world.
Yeah, yeah. But she's also careful to say that this doesn't, invalidate the overall importance of Frere's ideas.
Right. Especially for feminist scholarship.
She still sees his work as providing valuable tools for analyzing and challenging oppression.
Mhm.
And she makes this really important point that anyone who feels that deep thirst for change and
Mhm.
knowledge will find something really powerful in Frere's work,
Yeah.
regardless of, their social position.
And this connects to, her emphasis on the link between Freire's ideas and the development of Black feminist thought,
Right.
highlighting the absolute necessity of analyzing experiences through these intersecting lenses of race and gender.
Exactly. And this leads us to this really powerful idea of theory as liberatory practice.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. For Hooks, it sounds like theory wasn't just this abstract intellectual exercise.
Right. It was much deeper than that.
Yeah.
She describes her own path to theory as really personal.
Hmm.
It came out of experiences of pain and a need for healing.
Wow.
And she saw theory as a space where she could confront and challenge oppressive forces.
That's a really beautiful way to think about it. And she also makes some interesting observations about how feminist theory was being produced at the time.
Yeah.
She observed this growing emphasis on written narratives, and she really stressed the importance of understanding that gender is socially constructed.
Not just biological.
Right. And she also highlights the role of women of color
Mm-hmm.
in challenging and reshaping mainstream feminist theory.
Right. Because mainstream feminism was often dominated by the perspectives of white academics.
Right. And this leads to a really important discussion about the potential pitfalls of essentialism
Essentialism.
and identity politics.
Yeah, can you break down what she means by those terms?
So essentialism is this idea that there's this fixed essence to a particular identity.
Right, like there's a universal experience of being a woman or being Black or, yeah.
Right. And it can be dangerous because it can lead to the exclusion or marginalization of people whose experiences don't fit that neat little box.
Right, it oversimplifies complex realities.
Right. And identity politics can also be problematic if it's not approached carefully,
How so?
because it can lead to this kind of competition
Yeah.
between different groups, who's more oppressed, who's more marginalized.
All right, instead of focusing on shared struggles and solidarity.
Right.
Yeah.
So Hooks really emphasizes the importance of bringing personal experiences into the learning space.
Yeah, she sees that sharing lived realities as crucial for building community
Right.
and challenging that traditional model of the all-knowing teacher.
Right. And she critiques those approaches that devalue experience, that see experience as somehow less than or not as valuable as, academic knowledge.
And this all ties back to her engagement with those debates around essentialism,
Yeah.
especially in relation to the experiences of Black women.
Right. And she really challenges those scholars who dismiss or downplay Black feminist thought,
Yeah.
or who center their analysis solely on race as it's experienced by men, thereby overlooking the unique experiences of Black women.
Absolutely.
So yeah, experience is important,
Yeah.
but she also makes it clear that it's not enough on its own.
Right.
Those experiences need to be examined and analyzed and kind of connected to broader theoretical frameworks to be truly empowering for learners.
It's about bringing those two things together.
Right.
The lived experience and the theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hooks also delves into the really complex topic of feminist solidarity
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
and acknowledges the challenges to building real connections, especially across lines of race and class.
It's so important to remember that, like, the historical relationship between black and white women, for example, is deeply intertwined with the legacies of slavery and ongoing racial inequality.
Right. And she talks about how, fears rooted in both patriarchy and racism have historically shaped relationships between black men and white women as well.
Yeah, it adds another layer of complexity to the whole picture.
And she doesn't shy away from talking about how white women have sometimes reinforced racial hierarchies,
Right.
within this system of white supremacist patriarchy.
Yeah, whether consciously or unconsciously, it's a reality we have to confront.
And she also notes that, like, contemporary discussions often reveal this deep-seated resentment
Mm-hmm.
that many black women feel
Right.
because of, the ongoing reality of racial oppression
Yeah.
and a perceived lack of acknowledgement from white women in feminist spaces.
Right, like their voices aren't being heard or their experiences aren't being validated.
Right. And this fear of betrayal
Yeah.
has been, a big obstacle to building trust and solidarity.
It's understandable, given the history.
Yeah. And she also talks about the specific challenges faced by black students within feminist classrooms,
Yeah.
where they might feel isolated or misunderstood,
Well,
or, their perspectives might be marginalized if the focus remains too narrow.
right, if it's just about gender and doesn't take into account the ways that race and class intersect with that.
Right. So for Hooks, creating truly inclusive feminist learning environments means like building spaces where black students feel safe to share their experiences
Hmm.
and where feminist theory actively engages with those intersecting issues.
Absolutely.
It's not just about gender in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding how all these different systems of oppression work together.
Yeah, and she suggests that, the survival strategies and resistance tactics developed by black women in the face of both sexism and racism actually hold really valuable insights for broader movements working towards liberation,
Right.
which is a really powerful point.
Yeah. And this, kind of leads us to her ideas about how to build a teaching community.
Okay, so how does she envision that?
She stresses the importance of like critical thinkers engaging in dialogue across boundaries,
Mhm.
breaking down those traditional silos and really talking to each other.
Yeah, to transform teaching practices.
Right. And one key concept here is this idea of liberatory pedagogy,
Liberatory pedagogy.
which she says demands that we engage with the limits of the body.
The limits of the body. Okay, I'm intrigued. What does she mean by that?
It's about acknowledging that, both teachers and learners are embodied beings.
Yeah, we're not just minds floating in space.
Right. We have bodies, and those bodies have limitations, and those limitations shape our experiences.
Right, and recognizing that can actually challenge those traditional power dynamics
Right.
where the teacher is seen as this, like, purely intellectual figure.
Right, like disembodied.
Yeah, yeah.
It becomes much more human.
Yeah.
And she really highlights the teacher's role in creating an environment where students feel like their voices are heard,
Right.
like where their contributions are valued.
Hmm.
And this requires a conscious effort to disrupt teaching methods that silence students
Yeah.
and to really cultivate mutual listening and respect in the classroom.
It's about creating a space for dialogue, not just a one-way flow of information.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
she contrasts this with the idea of a classroom as a project of freedom,
A project of freedom.
as opposed to one where teachers feel like they have to exert control.
Right. So it's not about the teacher being in control, but about creating a space where freedom can flourish.
Right. And she observes that some teachers fear that, incorporating more engaged methods
Yeah.
might make them appear less serious or less knowledgeable.
Like they're losing control.
Right, like they're not the expert anymore.
Yeah.
But Hooks argues that a truly engaged classroom is dynamic.
Mhm.
It's constantly changing based on the contributions of everyone there.
And she critiques what she calls the banking system of education,
Right,
where teachers just deposit knowledge into the students.
right. Like they're empty vessels to be filled.
Yeah. And instead, she advocates for teachers to be really attuned to the mood and the atmosphere of the classroom,
Right.
because those things really impact how learning happens.
Right. And she acknowledges that engaged pedagogy can be really tiring.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's demanding.
But she also believes it's far more rewarding
Ultimately.
for both the teacher and the learner.
Yeah, it's about connection, right?
Yes.
It's about building those relationships.
And she, kind of brings it all back to this idea that teaching is fundamentally about being with people.
Yeah, it's a human endeavor.
Right.
Yeah, and you can't talk about teaching and learning without talking about language,
Right.
right? Language is so central to the whole process.
Yeah, and Hooks talks about how language shapes our understanding of the world
Mhm.
and how it can be used to reinforce power structures or to challenge them.
It's a tool that can be used for good or for bad.
Right. And she talks about the historical trauma
Yeah.
associated with the imposition of English as the language of conquest.
On Native Americans, African Americans, so many groups.
Yeah, the violence of being forced to speak the oppressor's language.
Right.
But she also finds this element of resistance
Oh, interesting.
within that necessity.
Yeah.
She talks about the development of like a new world English among enslaved Africans.
Oh, wow.
This language that was like broken and remade
Powerful.
and became a tool for building community and resisting oppression.
It's like taking back the power of language.
Right. And she raises some really important questions about the concept of an official English language.
Mhm.
She argues that this idea of a single standardized language can mask the richness and diversity of experience.
Right. It silences those whose language practices don't conform to the dominant norm.
Right. And she calls for a more democratic state of language.
I love that phrase. A
Yeah.
democratic state of language. What does that look like?
Well, she doesn't really lay out a specific blueprint,
Right.
but it's this idea that, we should value the contributions of all speakers,
Mhm.
all languages, all dialects, all vernaculars.
It's about recognizing the equality of all forms of expression.
Yeah.
And this means, in the classroom setting, valuing the different languages and, ways of speaking that students bring in.
Right. And not seeing them as deficits or something to be corrected.
Right. And Hooks also talks about this other issue that's often overlooked, which is class.
Yeah. Class is so important.
And she points out that there's, comparatively less discussion about class in the academy than there is about race and gender.
it's true.
But she argues that a student's class background really shapes their experiences and expectations in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And she notes how the values and norms of the middle and upper classes often dominate,
Right.
which can silence or marginalize students from working class backgrounds.
Yeah. They might feel like they don't belong.
Yeah, they might feel like their experiences and perspectives aren't valued.
Right.
And Hooks sees feminist learning spaces as having this potential to be really important sites for, addressing class difference
Yeah.
alongside gender privilege.
Right. It's about intersectionality, right?
Recognizing how these different forms of oppression
Right.
overlap and intersect.
Right.
Yeah.
And this requires educators to be aware of their own class biases.
Yeah. We all have them.
Right.
It's important to be reflective about that.
And she advocates for creating a democratic space where all voices are heard and valued, regardless of class background.
And that means sharing a wide range of experiences.
Right.
To challenge those assumptions based on a presumed, shared class background.
Right.
Yeah. And then finally, in a chapter that I think might surprise some people, Hooks delves into the role of eros in the classroom.
Yeah, eros and eroticism, which are not topics that are typically discussed in educational settings,
Right.
but she argues that they're actually really important.
And why is that?
Well, she points to this long-standing Western philosophical tradition that separates the mind and the body.
Right. This Cartesian dualism.
Right. And she argues that this has really shaped our approach to education.
Yeah, like we think of learning as purely a mental activity.
Right.
And we ignore the fact that we're embodied beings.
Right.
And she also talks about how the historically dominant role of white men in educational leadership has contributed to a certain way of viewing the body in the classroom.
Right, often as something to be controlled or ignored.
Yeah.
But Hooks argues that we need to recognize the whole person,
Mm.
the mind, the body, and the spirit in the learning process.
It's about embracing our wholeness.
Right. So in this deep dive into Bell Hooks' teaching to transgress, we've explored her really powerful vision for creating engaged learning environments.
Yeah.
The complexities of navigating multiculturalism, the profound impact of Paulo Freire's ideas on liberation, how theory can be a tool for empowerment when it's linked to lived experience,
Mm,
the ongoing challenges of building feminist solidarity across differences, the importance of fostering teaching communities, the transformative potential of language,
absolutely.
the need to challenge linguistic dominance, the often silent issue of class, and the, kind of surprisingly relevant role of arrows in education.
And for you, the listener, I think these insights offer a really valuable framework for thinking about how any learning environment can be made more inclusive, more stimulating, and ultimately more meaningful. And these ideas aren't limited to traditional classrooms. They can be applied to any space where knowledge is shared and developed.
Right.
And as a final thought, I would encourage you to consider how bringing a sense of arrows, that holistic engagement of mind, body, and spirit into your own learning process, might fundamentally change how you connect with new ideas.
Yeah, how might it deepen your connection, not only to the subject matter itself,
Yeah.
but to the people you're learning with?
It's a beautiful thing to think about.
Really is.